Database Hygiene with Grant Fritchey.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serves companies building mission-critical software systems. Quick announcements about my monthly forums. We're in the second year of the Architect Forums, and we have our new software executive leadership forums. But if you're looking to collaborate with peer software architect leaders or software executive leaders, you can just sign up at the link in the show notes. And for those of you who are looking for Programming with Palermo, my video podcast, you can just search for it in any of the directories and you'll be able to find it. My guest today on the show is Grant Fritchey. He has over 30 years of experience in IT, specializing in development and database administration. He works for Redgate Software as a product advocate and writes articles for SQL Server Central and Simple Talk, among others. He's the author of SQL Server Execution Plans and SQL Server Query Performance Tuning. He also co-authored Query Store for SQL Server 2019, Expert Performance Indexing, SQL Server MVP Deep Dives 2, Beginning SQL Server 2012 Administration, and Pro SQL Server 2012 Practices, and so many more. He presents at conferences and user groups worldwide and is available for part-time and short-term consulting contracts. Since 2019, he's been recognized as a Microsoft SQL Server MVP, and he's received the AWS Community Builder Award for the past number of years. And in 2014, he was honored as a Dunn Bradstreet MVP, and in 2011, received the Tech10 Award in Rhode Island. Grant, welcome to the Azure DevOps Podcast. How are you, sir?
Well, thank you. Thank you. Boy, some of that stuff's old.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you do quite a bit, it starts to add up. But it's interesting. The listenership, done some demographics. The listenership of the podcast, the average age kind of creeps down because so many more young people are entering the industry. And so, yeah, when you have a career such as you, it takes a little bit to introduce you because of all the items. But I want to ask you about some of that. But before I do that, you focus on the database aspect of custom software. So what was the point in your career, or multiple points, that kind of led you in that direction and kind of end up making a career of what it's been?
Have you ever been in one of those lines where you're kind of not paying attention? You're standing there with a bunch of people, and then you hear somebody say something, and everyone takes a step back, and you're the one standing there going, "Wait, what happened?" That's kind of how I became a DBA.
Okay.
I had been working in development, was my main thing. I love developing software. It's just wonderful. And I've been working in development, and I was pretty happy there. I was working for a .com, and we had lost the DBA. I found out later why, but we lost the DBA, and just things were just getting worse and worse and worse. And I went into the boss's office, and I'm like, I'm kind of on a little rant, like, this is bad and this is bad. We've got to fix this, and what's going on? And he's like, okay, hang on. And he starts writing stuff on the whiteboard, and I'm like, oh, cool. We're going to get something done. This is great. And so we get about 4 or 5 items on there, and he's like, okay, now which one of these things should you start with? And I'm like, whoa, time out. What? He's like, yeah. He goes, yeah, you're a DBA now. I want you to get started on all these things. And since you identified them, you can help fix them. And sure enough, I was a DBA. Now, it came with a pay raise, so that was cool.
Nice.
But yeah, that kind of got me started. I mean, I'd been doing data through development all along, right? I mean, even though I was building custom software, it was always to manage data, always collecting more data or reporting on data or doing something with data. Data was just always there. And so inevitably you've built up skills that are maybe not development skills, but that are data focused skills, and so that's how I moved into it, and the rest is history, really.
That's true. Software, it doesn't really do much unless it has data to operate on and it can save data. Now, just so the listeners understand, what have been some of the characteristics of most of the databases that you worked on? Are they everything, reporting database, multi-gigabyte, terabyte databases, or high throughput databases?
I really have done all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the work I've worked on has been OLTP, online transaction processing,
Okay.
data collection, and lots of it was pretty traditional, boring, fill in a form, save it kind of stuff, which was easy. But we also did a lot of. I had one of the highest volume databases back in SQL Server 7
Mm-hmm.
a million years ago. But we had one of the biggest databases out there from an OLTP standpoint. We had more people and more data flowing through it than anybody else at the time. But then I've gone on to work for banks, insurance companies, and at the insurance company we just did lots and lots of it was lots of small databases. It wasn't like any one big giant database. It was lots of little databases, and there were just lots of them. And so the interesting thing was is that big data or bigger data has actually a lot of the same problems that smaller data has. So even though we weren't dealing with 5 terabytes, 20 terabytes, we were dealing with 500 gigs, 700 gigs. The issues are the same. I mean, how do you tune the queries? How do you
Mm-hmm.
architect the database correctly? How do you ensure that you're getting good throughput on everything? And then, of course, how do you protect it, right? How do you ensure that if something goes wrong, you can get data back? Because inevitably something goes wrong. I mean, there's just always it. I have a joke. There's a stuff called extrasolar radiation, and it's radiation generated elsewhere in the universe,
Mm-hmm.
and the Earth can pass through that. And as the Earth passes through extrasolar radiation, that can cause corruption on data storage. I mean, come on, the universe is
Okay.
against us, right? So we
Gotcha.
have to have good backups and a methodology for getting back to where we started, and that's just been a big driver across my career
Gotcha.
throughout it.
And I like to pull out acronyms for those listeners who haven't heard it. OLTP stands for Online Transaction Processing. And
Right.
as I do that, I mean, I've known what that stands for my entire career, but there's so much jargon. There's so many more teams out there that have some developers, but do not have a DBA. And somebody says, well, okay, let me figure this stuff out. And I'm not sure if there's data on shortages of, data focused professionals, but what are some of the things that every developer who's even typing in a connection string to a database from their code just needs to know? What are the rookie mistakes to avoid?
I think the easiest one to explain is when you pick a database, and there's nothing wrong with, like, there's the object oriented databases, there's the document databases, there's relational databases. When you pick a database, you should pick a database not because, well, this is the one I know, because that's just a poor choice.
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably, you should pick a database that's going to fulfill the needs. If you're doing, say, you're building an application that's collecting telemetry data, right? So you've got a fleet of trucks around the world, and you need to collect thousands of points of data, millions of points of data. Relational data structure is probably not going to help you. And something like Elasticsearch, like a search engine data store, is not going to help you. But some kind of document database like Mongo will. So that's great. Go with Mongo, get that that telemetry data set up. Cool. Now your next application you have to build is transaction processing for that warehouse. How many tires do we have left? How many spark plugs? Mongo's probably not going to help you now.
Mm-hmm.
So now you want to look at something like a relational data structure, which can probably support that better. And so the key is pick the data store or the problem space. But then this is the hard part. This is where people fall down. Well, I'm used to working in documents, or I'm used to working with objects. So what I'll do is I'll take my document or my object and I'll put it into my relational data store. Now you have problems,
Mm-hmm.
because what you're going to hit is that relational data stores aren't good at managing documents. Relational data stores aren't good at managing objects. They are good at managing relationships and relational data storage. And so what you have to do is you really do need to identify what's going to serve you best and then work within that paradigm. And that's the rookie mistake that people make, is that they try to force a database to a paradigm. I mean, you'll see the same thing from a DBA, though. There's DBAs that are like, well, I know Oracle, and Oracle's great, and Oracle does all the things good in the world, and therefore Oracle will fix and do our thing that really ought to be a document database.
Mm-hmm.
No, please don't do that. It's just, you have a good hammer, everything is not a nail. You have a good wrench, everything is not a bolt. Use the right tool for the right job.
That's a good point. What's your view of the major database platforms adding document support? Is it just a lip service, or is it actual document support?
Well, I mean, sure, there's some of that's going on, right? It's like, oh, hey, look, we've ticked the box on the buzzword, so now you can stay with us. That happens without a doubt. No, what I think it is what you're seeing is that and it's the reason we're seeing a lot more cross-platform, a lot more people with multiple database platforms, is because what we're seeing is like, well, 98% of our data is OLTP.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to fit into this relational data structure just fine. Everything's going to work. We're okay. But we've got this one little project on the side, and it's not big. It's not huge. It's not all encompassing. It's not the primary focus of the organization. But damn, if we could just plug it into the existing data structure, it'd be a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Hey, look, there, it does support, vector storage. It supports, whatever. Pick that buzzword. Now that's working with that relational data structure. In that case, it's great. I mean, in that case, I would embrace it. I just wouldn't, oh well, we can store this, therefore this becomes our central mechanism. Not always. It's just you just hit issues there, and so frequently going with best of breed is a good solution, but sometimes good enough is good enough.
Mm-hmm. I want to include a link to your blog, scarydba.com, in the show notes. But one of your recent blog posts is about databases and databases restore being the only way to really test to see if you actually captured a backup. So I want you to talk about that and other things that every software team needs to do just so that they know that their database just has basic hygiene.
Right. Well, I mean, the one thing I would say is make sure that you've got backups first. I mean, make sure you have backups, because you can't do a restore without a backup. So you've got your first focus has to be the backup, but it has to be a backup. There's way too many places that are going like, oh, well, we've got this really fancy storage system, and therefore we don't have to have backups. Guys, the fancy storage systems can go offline.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest storage systems you've ever paid money for are amazing and they're wonderful. And I'm not going to say bad things, but if somebody pulls the power on it, it's gone. You know what I mean? And just stuff can happen, right? And it's just, heck, one of my favorites is where, we had a user had too much access and they intentionally, not on purpose, but with intent, deleted data. And then went, oh, well, I need that back. Well, no, it's gone. So now we have to be able to restore data. So here's the kicker. Lots of people will set up backup. They will buy a backup appliance. They will do whatever they have to do. They will set up backups and they will have backups. Cool, we have backups. Awesome. When is the last time you did a restore? And if the answer is never, Okay, well, then you have no idea how to
Mm-hmm.
do this. And worse, you don't know if your backups are going to work. You don't know if they're going to do the things that you need them to do. And this was a very recent case. It took place, the initial problem took place about 6 months ago. But I've got examples going back decades. It is still a very common problem. People take backups or think they have, and then the bad thing happens, whatever it might be. And in this case, they were attacked with it was a ransomware attack, and successful, but they did not have backups. And well, they had backups, but they had never tested them.
Yeah.
And so when they went to go restore, nope, didn't work. And so all kinds of problems, occur from there. I mean, and I've seen that over and over again for so many places. It's extremely common. I mean, it's as common as picking the wrong data platform for a given scenario. People just don't think about the fact that stuff breaks, right? The universe is imperfect. Even though we may be the smartest people in the room and we may be great at our jobs, but all it takes is one person not quite as smart as you to mess something up, and now we're in a recovery situation. And if you've never recovered, ow, right? And the fun thing is when you get in a recovery situation, everyone may not experience this, but the interesting thing is, and especially now that we're in remote working scenarios, it may not be the same, but when we used to be in the office, when we went into recovery, when something bad happened and we were having to restore a database, you're not restoring it alone. Your boss is standing on this shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Their boss is standing on that shoulder, and their boss's boss is right there. And they're watching every keystroke. And every time you go, oh, darn, which, I mean, and granted, you might not say darn, you might say another word. Everyone goes, oh my God. And you're like, no, typo, it's okay. Hang on. So you've got to have done a restore at least once, but preferably you've practiced and prepared, and you know how to restore things, regardless of the data platform. I mean, if you're on Postgres, which beautiful, lovely platform, love it, get backups done, practice restores. If you're on SQL Server, wonderful platform, get backups done, practice restores. If you're on AWS RDS, if you're in the cloud, make sure you know how to restore from the cloud, because it's not an automatic flip a switch, hit a button thing. There's actually a process involved. And so you've got to make sure that you know that process, because otherwise you're offline, your company is suffering, and the longer you stay there, the more suffering there is, and the more people are going to start popping up behind you at your cube. And they may even fly into your remote office. Who knows? But yeah, it's just all about being sure that you can do that restore. And the only way to do it is practice.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery. ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
There's so many options, and I'll just focus on SQL Server. You can do tons of SQL Server books, and that's probably the most common one used by the listeners of this podcast. There's so many checkboxes and options for incremental backups, full backups, and triggering them on a certain frequency. When you just go in, what's your favorite go-to options and frequency? Just say, okay, hey, let's get this in place, and then we'll tune it later if we have specific scenarios. But let's just get it in place. Boom, here's my default.
Right. Well, I mean, honestly, I hate to say this, I don't have one, because here's the deal. Recovery is a business problem. It's not a technical problem. So there's these things called RPO and RTO, recovery point objective and recovery time objective. Now, recovery point objective, the RPO, is how much data can we lose? Now, the answer is always none. zero. But then when you start discussing how much that's going to cost, you'll find that, oh, okay, we can lose an hour.
Yeah.
We could lose 10 minutes, and so then you say, okay, cool. I know what my recovery point objective is. Once you've got the RPO, you can say, okay, well, I'm going to, a daily backup, twice daily, differentials, and then log backups every 10 minutes. And that way I'm only going to lose up to 10 minutes. And the reason I break it down into a full and differentials is because it actually can speed up recovery, because you can do a full and a differential and then just the logs. So because then the second thing is the recovery time objective. How long does it take to recover your database? And that's really a question of, you've practiced restoring, so you know how big your database is, you know how long it takes to restore that database. And so from there, you can tell the company, all right, a restore takes 2 hours, and then I'll get a recovery done in 2 hours. And so that's going to be my objective, is to always stay within that time. And I'm going to test on a regular basis to validate I can stay within that time. And if I can't, then we'll have to have a discussion on what do we do? Do we make our databases smaller? Do we take more frequent backups? Do we, as you say, you're going to start tuning things after that. But I always want to sit down with the business first, because it is very much a business problem, and say, okay, how much data can we really lose? And I know the answer is always zero.
Yeah.
But that's a negotiating point, right? We start at zero and then we get to the real number.
Just like uptime. We can never go down, not for a minute.
Yeah, exactly.
So what is regular basis? Is it some number of times a year? You're not advocating doing a restore every day.
We'd automated where we were doing restore every day, because we had a secondary system that we were maintaining as a copy of production. We were using it for both testing and reporting.
Yeah.
And so we actually did restore every day. And so we knew if there was a problem, we knew immediately. Now, is that a normal process? No. I would say you should treat it like, we used to do drills in the Navy. And we would do them, the important ones you would do once every couple of weeks, once a month. The unimportant ones would, 3 months, 6 months, sometimes once a year. But I would say probably once a month you should sit down and run a restore, and you should be able to do that regularly. I mean, and maybe you've got 100 databases that that you care about, right? You really care about. Well, you're not going to sit there and run 100 restores on a day.
Yeah.
But maybe every Friday you restore 3 databases or something. So every Friday you run through 3. Yeah, cool, we're good. And and just have this running, rolling thing. It is about arriving at a place where you're doing enough protection and enough work on that protection that you're sure that when the emergency comes, you're going to be okay. You want to have resiliency and practice and methodologies in place ahead of the emergency. And so it's just a question of building out that tiger team, that response team that's going to let you be able to ensure that you're protecting the environment.
Yeah.
Now, if you're a really tiny shop, once every 6 months is probably fine. But when we're talking enterprise level stuff, you've got to get serious about this, because enterprises have gone out of business because of data loss. It's happened. It's horrifying, but it's happened.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of stories out there. Heck, there was Toy Story 3 almost went under because they had a data loss at work and didn't have any backups. But one of the engineers was making copies, bringing it home to show her kids. And so she had everything from the day before through sheer luck.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's just, the number of stories out there about it, it's limitless, the number of stories. And so it's kind of horrifying that we're still telling the same story. That somebody 6 months ago went, oh gosh, we hadn't tested backups, and now we are in an emergency situation, and oh no, everything's on fire. It's like, come on.
Yeah. So when we do the restore, I remember just writing the queries to shuck out the count of records in each table, just to say, okay, did all the tables get populated? Do we have the right? And it's not the exact number of records because some of the data has changed. But what is your favorite thought when answering the question, was this restore successful? Is it just that? Oh, do I have the right number of record counts?
I don't even look at that. I'm literally I look at the dates and times when we did the backup last night at 10 p.m. whatever. Is there data from 9:58 p.m. in this database?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We're done.
Okay.
Right. I don't need to count the rows.
Gotcha.
They're there. Right.
Okay.
If the restore succeeded, the data's there. At least up to the time that we think it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so that's always the question is can we restore right up to that point in time that we need to? But once you've done that, yeah, I kind of don't sweat that part.
Okay.
It kind of takes the pressure off because then you don't have to worry about
it. with so much maturity coming in DevOps automation and creating of non-production databases and putting in test data and then production snapshots and sanitizing sensitive rows coming from production, should teams just be adding this to the operational part of DevOps and just having it automatic, or is this to something where okay, we still need a person doing it manually on some frequency?
I would do both. I would do both because you absolutely, you should be automating most of this, right? That's a given, right? I'm a DevOps person. I am 100% on side with that. All of that should be automated, and you shouldn't have to sweat these kinds of things. So there should be a whole lot of automation around it, and that's all for the good. And you probably ought to have practice on the recovery for the humans that are going to be involved with that process, because in a given situation, the automation might not cover it, or in a given situation, the automation might be offline, or and so just like I made sure I taught my daughter how to change a flat tire. We walked through it. I made her do it, which was not a fun adventure, believe me. But it's all about making sure that you know how to recover. And by the way, I have gone back and said, okay, now where's your jack?
Yeah.
And made her show me that she knew everything that we'd taught, and she's good. But yeah, I guess, the actual, when you say DBA, people say it means database administrator, but for some reason, the letters DBA actually mean paranoid control freak.
Oh,
I don't know why they didn't use PCF, but what are you going to do?
Right. So it sounds like kind of in your Navy drills, have the automation do it, but then there needs to be a training exercise so that the people know what to do, not just necessarily that the backup was good. Okay, great. We have a good backup, but now a person knows what to do in the scenario where production database is gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. It just really is, because I love our machines. I trust our machines. I trust our processes even more than I trust our machines. And the automation of those processes, all of that's vital. And then the extra solar radiation comes by, and there's got to be a Mark I eyeball who knows what to do.
So in this, if there's going to be an environment that you can use to make the restore, and I'm thinking those 500 gigabyte databases, then it sounds like even just for restore, when you're speccing out a production environment, you kind of have to have capacity for two production databases, because otherwise then how could you test a restore? And then when you're in that scenario, am I thinking about that right?
Yeah, I mean, this is where things get really entertaining, right? This is the fun part. But yeah, you kind of do. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to have two copies of production, because certainly testing restore, you don't have to test it against something with the same amount of memory or the same number of CPUs, although they do affect restore time. So that may come into play in terms of your testing and validation. But it is about storage. I'm a storage company's best friend, because I will advocate for more storage all the time. It's a curse. You do have to have some extra storage. You have to have overhead to allow you to validate everything so you can do these recoveries and practice these recoveries. Because it's, do we want to pay for an extra 2 terabytes of storage, or do we want to be offline for a week?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to pay for 2 terabytes of storage. That's
Yeah.
We don't have to think about that.
And these days, 2 terabytes is not actually any at all when you think about it. Yeah. Yeah.
But, again, depending on your database, if it's 10 terabytes, maybe, but again, there's a rough situation you get into. Although I know I've also worked in organizations where their databases are huge, right? It's in the neighborhood of petabytes. Now, do they back those up and test those backups? No. But most of those are hardcore, large-scale data warehouses. What do they test and have backups of? The 15 or 20 OLTP systems that are feeding the data warehouse. And so can they rebuild? Yes. And usually a rebuild is a faster process than trying to do a backup and a restore. So, situationally, there are places where a backup doesn't make sense, but you still then have to have some kind of protection. And so it's figuring out what you do to ensure that, especially if your business is completely dependent upon that data. If it goes away and then the business goes away, you probably are going to want to have some kind of secondary thing. Do you have replication to a secondary environment? You know what I mean? Like there's a whole bunch of things that you could look at doing, right? But it's figuring out and for your people, SQL Server, not replication, an availability group.
Okay.
But if it's Postgres, it would be replication.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good point with the data warehouse. If it goes away, how do you get back to normal? What's the mechanism to get back to normal?
Right. Yeah, and maybe that's just reloading it. Maybe your database is, maybe your warehouse, and I've seen big ones that are loaded nightly. Right there. And when I say loaded, I mean loaded from scratch every night. Okay, fine. Do reload, right? It's just instead of a backup and a restore, but it's still about can we recover?
Yeah.
Can we recover from an outage? And that's always the question. And the only way to know that you can recover from an outage is to recover from an outage.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of the DevOps angle, and if the SQL Server environment is in Azure, then that makes the infrastructure side a whole lot easier because it's just a few command lines and you got plenty of capacity, and then you have a chunk of time where you're actually restoring and getting a second database up online and run a few commands, queries against this. Look, okay, it's really there, and now we throw it away, and that's pretty cheap.
Yeah. Well, and the beauty of Azure for something like Azure SQL Database, Azure Managed Instance, where they're doing the backups for you. You can kind of, you can relax. That's beautiful. You still have to go through a recovery process, and so you really should know how to do that, so that should the bad thing happen, whatever the bad thing might be, you can then recover. Because otherwise, then you're going like, oh, wait a minute. We know we can recover, but somebody's got to look that up, find it on the internet. The AI can help us, surely. It would be a really good idea to know that beforehand.
You mean you're advocating for some genuine intelligence on the team instead of artificial intelligence?
Artificial intelligence, it's good and all, and I like it. Actually, I'm doing a presentation on it in a couple of weeks, but I love it. I do love it, but it's not replacing humans anytime real soon.
Yeah, it's good when it's used by an actual intelligence.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, as we get to the end of our time here, is there any other tips, any other resources that you would point custom software teams through that again don't have the tenured DBA, just to make sure that they're doing the good basics to have good hygiene in their database usage and management?
Wow. Oh, wow. Now, so you can put me on the spot. I don't think I've got a good resource to point them out for that. Simple Talk. There's it's a large collection of tech edited content. It's not like my blog. I put my blog together myself. I throw it out there. It's a blog. But Simple Talk which is it's redgate.com/simpletalk, or I'm sure you can get to it with simpletalk.com.
Yeah.
That has got curated, tech edited content, and that will tell you how to do proper backups, what RPO, what RTO. There's documentation across all of that. Heck, I've even got some articles up there on how companies went out of business because they did not have backups. That's where I would point people. Yeah, good question. You got me.
Yeah, well, there it is, redgate.com/simpletalk. We'll include a link to that in the show notes. Yeah, this is a lot. Yeah, this is a lot of good content. So that'll be really useful for the listeners. Because, and I think, if the number of just developers versus demand continues to grow, I think it's the same thing proportionally with database professionals, and there's some class of software that doesn't have a database, but most of it does.
Yeah. Well, we used to call them accidental DBAs. I was considered an accidental DBA, like I got it by accident. Now we actually call it reluctant DBAs. And it's the people who are like, look, I don't want this job. I don't want to do it, but I know more data and data management than the other developers on the team. So by default, I'm not taking the title. No one's ever going to call me that. But the work still has to get done. And so I'm going to make sure that we've got high availability, that we've got disaster recovery, that we've got the ability, that I've tested my backups and I can do a restore. There's going to be a reluctant DBA on the team. Just don't call him a DBA.
Right. Awesome. Well, Grant, thank you so much for coming on the Azure and DevOps podcast and sharing with us all of your experience with databases. I appreciate it.
Sure, no problem. Happy to, anytime.
Awesome. And until next time, dear listener, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.